welcome to the Carolina Weather Group for this Wednesday, June 10th, 2026. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina. So glad you're here with us tonight. A new conversation with the Storm Prediction Center, understanding their new intensity-based forecast. We'll explain what that means coming up. Special thanks to our YouTube and Patreon members who got early access to that interview. They also have early access right now to our new Carolina Weather Net. If you're watching right now on YouTube, stay tuned. You too will get a special peek coming up. But let's talk more about those new SPC changes. Greg Fishel and I caught up with them during the week. Take a listen.
Evan Bentley joins us from NOAA's Storm Prediction Center. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are y'all doing?
Good. So you're the Warning Coordination Meteorologist out there, and for anybody who doesn't know, you guys are the arm of NOAA that produce those severe weather outlooks. Some people might know them by their names. Marginal, slight, enhanced. Some people might just know them by their numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you guys are doing something in addition to this year to aid the communication. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so we aren't changing anything about the way that our categories are showing on the categorical outlook. So we still have the same risk categories 1 through 5, the marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and high. And what we have changed is we're adding additional information about the intensity. So in the past, let's say an enhanced risk day, we might, within the text there, be saying, hey, it's an enhanced risk for tornadoes. We could have the potential for several strong tornadoes to maybe even an intense tornado. And that was our only way to say anything about how intense the storms might be. Now, we had hatching in the past, but that was really just the chance of any EF2 plus tornado. And EF2 tornadoes are relatively common enough, especially when you get enough tornadoes. And so it wasn't saying a lot specifically about how intense we thought it might be. So now we've added intensity information with 3 categories for tornado and wind and 2 for hail that can say a little bit more. So we can say, what's the likelihood that we're going to have an EF2 or an EF3 or an EF4 plus tornado today? Or for wind, 75, 85, 95 plus mile per hour winds, or hail, 2-inch hail or 3.5-inch or greater hail. It gives a lot more information instead of just having to dig through the text that we've had in the past.
I'm going to put on the screen here for folks a little behind the scenes that you guys have from your website that shows a little bit of how the sausage is made. And it kind of alludes to what you just referenced. So we have your pre-existing categories here: marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and high, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then going up the y-axis, kind of, I guess you would call it the intensity. So a lot of these are going to be wind speeds, miles per hour, or maybe the size of hail. And then across the bottom, this is that new thing, right? So CIG 1, CIG 2, CIG 3. This is probably a lot for folks to look at it for the first time if they're looking at it for the first time. I know it was a lot for me to look at for the first time. The CIG 1, that's the shorthand for the new stuff?
Yeah, so the CIG stands for Conditional Intensity Group. So when you get down into the weeds, really what we're forecasting is a group of intensities. So, for example, for the Conditional Intensity Group 1, we might be forecasting that there's basically a 20% chance of an EF2 plus tornado with maybe a 6% or 7% chance that it's EF3 plus, right? And so, but that's kind of complicated to explain. But that's really what we're aiming for from a scientific perspective. So more simplistically, like for tornado, we're really saying like a reasonable maximum intensity is EF2 for that SIG level 1. That's SIG 2, the Conditional Intensity Group 2, or intensity level 2, as you might hear us call it. We're talking about the potential for EF3 plus tornadoes or EF4 plus tornadoes at the high end. Something like the hail would be the Conditional Intensity Group 1, 2-inch plus hail is possible, and then the really big hail. So the 3.5-inch plus softball size hail becomes possible with a Conditional Intensity Group 2. So it's really, we're trying to simplify the way that we word it, which under what is really a very complicated scientific process that got us there.
Yeah, a lot of math, a lot of numbers. I think a lot of our audience really enjoys rolling up their sleeves and probably going straight to spc.noaa.gov and looking at these outlooks in addition to the information they're getting from broadcast meteorologists and other partners. So this is an example of what one of those maps may look like now, right? It's kind of, in some of the most severe days, almost like you got 2 layers kind of going on here, right?
Yeah, and so that's we've got the probabilities, which really haven't changed. We've made a few slight modifications to it, but that's not really the big point. It's these different levels of, in the past we had the 1 hatching. Now we've got hatching, we've got cross lines, we've got double cross lines, but really that's just that intensity level 1, 2, and 3 that we have. Now, like in this example for the tornado, that intensity level 3, that's reserved for the potential for violent tornadoes. In the past, in our outlook, you would probably seen the actual wording that said potential for violent tornadoes today. we're reserving it for those days. So maybe 1 or 2 days a year. We haven't even had one yet this year, and we really haven't had any truly, large scale tornado outbreaks this year. So it actually kind of makes sense with the way that that's occurred. And we are reserving it for those days where you've got, half a dozen EF3 plus tornadoes, or, maybe 1 or 2 EF4 tornadoes. The big outbreak days are what we're targeting for that.
I'm going to go to Greg because I think he's probably thinking the same thing I might be thinking about, how broadcasters are going to have to disseminate all this.
Well, and we were talking before we started recording here about there's a table on the SPC site, if I'm remembering correctly, where it equates probabilities like of such and such occurring within 25 miles of a point. And so I always was afraid to talk in those terms because 30%, number one, or 25% doesn't sound like that big of a number. And if it's within 25 miles of a point, that means the probability of it happening at a point is infinitely less than that. And so that doesn't sound scary, And so the only way I knew to counteract that was to talk about the impact, that you may not think there's a very good chance of it going over your house, but if it does and you're not prepared, that may be it. But we were talking earlier, and perhaps from a public standpoint, maybe the best thing to do is not to even get into those probabilities because they may cause more confusion than anything else.
Yeah, and that's one thing you can do with these new conditional intensities is you can actually multiply the probability of the event by the probability you can infer from the conditional intensity group to get an unconditional probability. So, for example, what was a high risk before, which, if you want to equate it to our conditional intensity group 1 with our 30% tornado probabilities, or let's say conditional intensity group 2 with 30%, if you multiply those together, you get slightly below 10% unconditional probability. So you only have a 10% chance of an EF2 tornado within 25 miles of a point. So it's still a relatively low probability. But when you have that over a bunch of points, it is likely that somebody within a broader region is likely to be significantly impacted on that day. And so that's why we actually have these probabilities and the intensity information that shoot out a categorical outlook at the end. Because really, simplifying it down to a scale of 1 to 5, the marginal through the high risk, that is really the best way that we believe to convey that message. That it's really, hey, today's the level 3 out of 5 risk day, tornadoes are the primary risk. And that kind of helps to synthesize it and not get down into the weeds of the actual probabilities themselves. And the other part of that is, we've gotten a lot of questions. How should we communicate this intensity information? And I think there's a lot of value in just showing the actual, categorical risk for the day, or however tornado risk or wind risk or hail risk was shown in the past. But maybe on top of it, have a highlighted area or a dashed area that says, this is the area where the intensity could be greater. This is the area where the EF3 plus tornadoes are more likely today. To not overly complicate the message by adding a bunch of extra lines and that to the graphics, because that can add additional challenges, right?
And I always used to tell people that, if there's a warning issued for your area, go to your basement or your closet, wherever you go. And if nothing happens, don't be mad, be thankful.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Evan, am I right to kind of think that the existing categories that people have seen for years now is kind of like the chance of that form of severe weather happening, and these new intensity categories are more like the chances of, say, the worst case scenario or the type of severe weather happening, like an EF1 versus an EF4?
Yeah, so the probabilities, in comparing that to the conditional intensity, yes. As far as the actual categorical outlook, so the final thing that we have out there, we developed this in a way to match that to the way that it was occurring before. So a slight risk in the past, that level 2 out of 5, will still be a slight risk in the future. And we've seen that now doing this for about 3 months. We're having about the same number of slight risks, enhanced risks for similar type days as we did before, except in the past, it might have been a 15% hatched area for hail, for example. And that was kind of the only way to show that threat. Now we aren't confined to only doing it that way. We could add a 30% with nothing about certain intensity levels, or we could add 5% with intensity level 2 to get to a slight risk. We have basically multiple ways to get the message across. So it's not just chance of hail, some of it could be 2+ inches. It's not too many people will see hail, but those that do, it could be very large hail. Or we expect a lot of people to see hail, but none of it's going to be that really big hail that, puts dents in your cars. But, we could have some quarter size hail that, you wouldn't want to be stuck outside for, right? It can really help message the nuance in the forecast is really the value that we hope we're adding as new conditional intensity groups.
I'm going to put the chart back on the screen that we had at the beginning of our conversation, because I know you just mentioned that the categories are mostly the same. And I think you guys have seen that so far this year. But I think just based on our experience here in the Carolinas, I think there's one or two edge cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, where maybe people might see a category that they hadn't seen before. And I'm thinking about, we had a severe wind day here earlier in the Carolinas that I think probably was up here in the like 60 mile per hour moderate. And we ended up having a moderate for a lot of the Carolinas, which I think people often jump right to the tornado risk, right? But the tornado risk that day was probably a little bit lower. Is that kind of an edge case where we might see an extra enhanced or an extra moderate, but it's really based on some of these other hazards?
Well, so I'm glad you brought up that case, because there's kind of two pieces of that. One is, even in that case, we would have had a moderate risk out in the past for that same thing, but we probably wouldn't have gone 60%. So we would have capped it at 40%, 45%, because 60% would have been a high risk for wind. So we're still messaging it the same way. It's a moderate risk type day for wind. It wasn't a high risk type day. But now we have the ability to say, hey, we're putting this moderate out for high coverage. So we want 60% coverage, because we had the option. We could have kept it 45% coverage with SIG2 for the wind and still gone moderate. But that's a different message, right? That's maybe not as many people will see the wind, but those that do, we could be talking about up to 90 mile per hour winds. On that specific day, it was more like, no, we think a bunch of people are going to get wind. The peak winds might only be 75 to 80 miles per hour, and so it's kind of lower intensity, but a lot of people are going to get it. And so it probably would have been a moderate in the past, just with different probabilities. And so when we say it's the same, in the long run, we're still doing the same thing. Because that's one thing I'll break down here is when we're making our forecast, it's not just, what do I think wind coverage will be? Let's pluck out 75. Intensity, up to 75 to 80 looks good. We'll go SIG 1. Oh, hey, look, that gives me a moderate. That's not really the way we do the forecast. It's, hey, today's a moderate wind type day. Okay, now let me look in the probabilities. How do I want to message this? High probability, low intensity, or low probability, high intensity, or somewhere in between? That's more the way that we develop the forecast. And so that hasn't changed versus the way it's been done for the past 20 years, is kind of deciding what the message should be. Is it a enhanced or moderate type wind, enhanced or moderate type tornado day, and then making the probabilities and the intensity reflect that.
So that y-axis is the probability of severe wind happening.
Right. And that's one thing on the wind side that I'll mention that is really helpful. And I think you'll see it, especially there in the Carolinas, a fair amount, because we see a lot of high coverage wind events that occur over there. In the past, we were limited. If we went up to a 45% coverage of wind with any mention of hurricane force wind gusts, we were forced into a moderate risk. So there might be a lot of times when we're like, hey, yeah, there might be 300-400 blue dots on the SPC report map the next day. There might be a lot of people that have wind, but is this really the type of day that roofs are going to be ripped off, derecho type stuff that we would want a moderate risk message for? So we would artificially have to keep that probability at 30%. Or if we had no intensity area, we could go up to 45 under the old SIG system. But now you'll see we could have an enhanced risk that's 45%, 60, 75, 90% coverage. So we have the potential, even within that enhanced category, let's say we aren't limited at 45. We could have a 60% with no intensity area or 75% no intensity area. And what we're messaging that day is almost everybody in this area is probably going to see some really windy conditions this afternoon, but we're not expecting hurricane force winds. So it might be the type of thing, lawn furniture and, trampolines, make sure that those are secure, that type of thing. But this isn't, the type of thing that we're expecting mobile homes to be rolled and that type of thing, which have a lot greater threat to life. It might be more of the, that was an impactful event. I didn't want to park my car underneath a tree type situation, but not I'm scared for my life situation, which we really want to help nuance that when people are trying to make the best preparedness decisions.
Okay, so if people are looking to see how the sausage is made, that y-axis is the probability that the wind could happen, and then the SIG days 1, 2, and 3, those speak to the intensity of the winds, right? So that's how strong those winds might be.
Yep, great, well said.
And I was going to jump in on a lighter note here. When I heard the CIG, the acronym, I was at an AMS conference many, many, many years ago, and Fred Sanders from MIT was the luncheon speaker. And he said, there are too many acronyms in the world, and I'm going to start a no acronym project, or NAP.
It's
good. Yeah, I like it.
Acronyms. Yeah. Evan, we had your counterpart, Robbie Berg, on from the National Hurricane Center recently talking about the forecast cone. And I asked him a question that I'm going to pose to you. So as a podcast, a YouTube channel, as broadcasters who take your information and regurgitate it out to the public, is there anything we're doing that you want us to stop doing or you want us to do better?
I'm really curious, and we're kind of seeing the people who are like yourselves, who are more familiar with kind of communicating these threats and what the general public is looking for, to kind of see how this intensity information is shown. We've seen a lot of examples from places all throughout broadcast and in the streamer community and social media community, and it's kind of interesting to see all the ideas that everyone has about the ways to display it, and we're learning as a part of that as well, because display on our maps, we've got the intensity overlaid on top of our probabilities. We really see a lot of value in a briefing type scenario to kind of separate those out, to talk about here's your threat of being impacted, here's how intense it could be if it is. The problem is if we had that on our webpage and somebody just grabbed the intensity piece or just grabbed the probability piece, they're missing half the message. And so let's say if our intensity level 2 was red or pink, it might look like, wow, this is a really bad day. But if you don't know that the probability is only 5%, you're missing a big piece of that message. And so we chose to keep them overlaid, even though it complicates the graphics a little bit. But when you break it down, let's say you've got a newscast or you're giving a briefing and you actually have the opportunity to explain the nuance, there does seem to be value in separating those. And that's one of the things that we've seen so far. Another piece, and this isn't as much a correction because this is kind of a reminder for us as well as we're getting through these, is to emphasize what the risk is on a day. Because let's go back to that event that occurred in March across that area. We had a moderate risk out that was driven by wind, but we also had a 15% SIG1 for tornado. Well, in the past, a 15% with hatching on top of it was a moderate risk for tornadoes. And so based on the fact that 2 weeks earlier, that exact same probability with hatching across it would have been a moderate risk, I think led to perhaps a little bit more concern about the tornado threat than our probabilities were actually meaning, because under the new system, that's an enhanced risk for tornadoes. And so if you're explaining it kind of the way we did it in the past, that would have been a 10% because we chose to keep it enhanced for tornadoes. It would have been a 10% hatch. And it seemed like the messaging was more like a 15% hatch, which is very rare for that area. So that's kind of a reminder here early in the process that breaking down the actual categorical piece for wind, hail, and tornado and messaging accordingly, I think is an important piece that even we have to remember here as we're communicating that message, and make sure that it's clear to the people who are communicating it downstream.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think we're, like you said, about 2 weeks into that new system. And the other thing that's coming to mind with that is okay, now we're in June and we've really only had one big severe weather day, which was that March. So whenever the next big severe weather day happens, even though it's been months later, it's still going to be round 2 of trying to work through all of it for everybody. So that's what's on mind for me is okay, we've had not only a drought, but a severe weather drought. It's been, knock on wood, relatively calm here. And I got to keep all of this fresh in my mind because for everybody, we're gonna end up back in it at some point, Greg.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking about and I know this is off topic here, but with regard to the drought, how information at one point can be misleading in terms of talking about the large scale picture. And by that, I mean, at RDU, they didn't do all that well in the rainfall department over the last week. And so their rainfall deficit for the year is still way over 8 inches, but there were a lot of other areas that did a lot better than they did. And so I'm real curious when the update, if it hasn't already come out today, whether or not there's been slight improvement if you look at the large scale because of all the people that did get significant rain.
But the messaging there too is interesting, and I don't know if this puts a bow on what Evan was saying, right? So we've had lots of rain in the end of May, and we've been in this drought. So people see lots of rain and they go, "Okay, the drought's done," right? But it's really not done, right? We were so deep in the hole that although we were experiencing rain and it was helping resolve the drought, it didn't actually resolve it because we still have so many more inches of rainfall deficit for the year.
It's like the Mets being 11 games under 500. One win doesn't solve the problem.
I almost wore my Mets shirt today, but you wore a more fitting outfit, Greg.
Well, it's been 20 years since the Canes won the Cup, so we're trying to be optimistic here.
So, Evan, is there anything else we should know about the SIG days, the SPC outlooks, the severe weather season at all?
Well, as we're going here into June and July, I would guess there'll probably be a couple of days because it's fairly common out there. We get some storms that develop over the mountains and kind of move out into the Carolinas. And we get some of these days where we have a relatively high coverage of wind, but maybe not super intense. It wouldn't surprise me, if there's one of these days where maybe we have a 45% wind coverage that gives us an enhanced risk. The reminder would be, that is basically the equivalent to our old 30% wind categories, because that was kind of the lowest end we could get to go with enhanced for wind. Now 45 is the lowest when we don't have any intensity area in there. And so just because it's a different color on the map, it should be similar messaging to what the 30% area was in the past. It's just we've been undercalibrated for quite a while on our probabilistic coverage, because now report density is a lot higher. People have smartphones, they're getting the reports in, and weather service officers are doing a great job getting this information. And so we are way undercalibrated. So we're trying to increase our probabilities to become a little bit better calibrated. And that's what some of the system has helped with. So when you see some of those brighter colors and the probabilities on the map, just anchor back to what the actual categorical outlook is for the messaging piece. And I think that'll be the most helpful part to make sure that the same message is being sent that we desire as part of our forecast process.
Good advice.
I think the big takeaway for me out of this discussion is, as you said earlier, that one graphic is not going to tell the whole story. It's like, split it up and make sure that all elements of the message are getting out so that the public has the complete picture. Because sometimes, one graphic oversimplifies things and you don't really get all the detail you need.
All right. We appreciate Evan's time. I will tell you, I've talked to Evan once or twice now, and I'm still getting my head wrapped around it. So if you too are still getting your head wrapped around it, no worries. You're not alone. We will get through it together. And next time we have severe weather, we'll walk through it again in live time with you. So we appreciate Evan for explaining that to us and looking forward to getting those into your hands again when the weather warrants. All right, let's check in with Frank Strait right now for a check of your Carolina weather forecast. Frank has a
Good evening there, y'all. It's Carolina Weather Group meteorologist Frank Strait here with your forecast for the coming days for North and South Carolina. And we do have some activity coming our way. As a matter of fact, some activity ongoing right now across parts of North and South Carolina, according to late afternoon visible satellite pictures showing some shower and thunderstorm activity occurring over upstate South Carolina and into parts of North Carolina. We'll be on the lookout for isolated, locally damaging wind gusts with this thunderstorm activity. Most of this activity's moved out of upstate South Carolina now, but there is still a bit of a risk into the evening across North Carolina, including the Charlotte area and the Raleigh area as well. So from Charlotte to the Triangle, be on lookout there for locally damaging winds with any thunderstorms that move your way. Isolated storms that affect other parts of the Carolinas into this evening are not likely to reach severe levels. Looking elsewhere around the region and beyond, some gusty thunderstorms that are moving along the I-95 corridor. You can see some clouds over the northwest Caribbean and the Yucatan Peninsula and western Cuba, that associated with a little disturbance, tropical wave down there that's going to be pushing slowly northwestward in the coming days. There is a slight chance that this develops an area of low pressure in the Bay of Campeche in the coming days. National Hurricane Center does have a little 10% chance of development area outlined there, so it's something we'll be on lookout for. But if that were to spin up, it's likely to remain weak. It'll move into Mexico, and it's unlikely that we'll ever see any effects from it here in the Carolinas. So it doesn't appear to be anything to worry about for now. Looking to our northwest, you can see showers and thunderstorms, a severe weather outbreak going on over parts of the upper Midwest. The disturbance causing that will be pushing toward the east coast through tomorrow, and it looks like it'll generate another round of thunderstorms, mainly going by to our north. But some locally gusty thunderstorms can fire up in North Carolina with that tomorrow afternoon and evening. And then there's a cold front that's up along the Canadian border that will be pushing our way by Friday. Out ahead of that, though, it's going to get really hot and muggy. But as those storms move through, we'll see a potential for some more severe weather, again, mainly in North Carolina. Now, I mentioned that we have some hot weather coming our way, and we certainly do over the next couple of days. Looking at South Carolina statewide forecast, there's Thursday. check that out. We're looking at highs getting to 95 or so for your Thursday across much of South Carolina, and just about the entire state in the 90s, the exception being the higher spots in the sliver of mountains that we have in South Carolina and close to the beaches, thanks to the sea breeze. North Carolina also looking pretty hot in the east. Latest number for Raleigh here, that's actually Friday. Let's look at Thursday, 99 for your high on Friday. So if you're heading out to see Game 5, you probably want to wear your Canes jersey like mine here from the 2006 Stanley Cup run. Of course, that's long sleeves, and you'll be sweating up a storm in that one. So maybe you'll want to carry it in and have a nice T-shirt on to wear to the arena for the game there for your Thursday evening. Many other places, 95 plus in eastern North Carolina, 93 for Charlotte, a little cooler in the mountains, 82 for Boone, and 88 in Asheville for your Thursday. But as we go on to Friday, which looks to be the hottest day of the forecast period, there you go, some triple-digit readings showing up for Raleigh and Fayetteville and a lot of eastern North Carolina, the 95 to 100 range, and even some of the I-77 corridor getting there too with a forecast high of 96 for Charlotte. Even Asheville going up to 90 degrees on Friday, 80 for Boone, so not as hot in northwestern North Carolina in those higher elevations. As for South Carolina, we're looking at a sultry day here as well, with some triple-digit readings showing up in the usual hot spots, Columbia, Camden, Cheraw, all places that are typically the hottest in the state. Maybe a few spots outside of that region ticking up to 100, but a lot of the state in the 95 to 100 degree range, and even the I-85 corridor, 93 to 95 for the most part, and only the immediate beaches and highest spots in the northwest managing to stay below 90 degrees for your highs. As for heat index, this is going to be pretty rough. The hottest day being Friday with 105 to maybe even 110 in the hottest spots for your heat index there in South Carolina for Friday. As for y'all up in North Carolina, your peak heat index, there we go, for Friday shows not quite as severe with not as much humidity in North Carolina, but still a lot of places going above 105 for your heat index on Friday. Very much a hot and sultry day. So if you have to be out working or if you're planning to be out playing in the heat, yes, me being perhaps crazy, going to play pickleball here in Columbia Friday evening for a while with temperatures peaking around 100 degrees, probably dropping a degree or two before we play, but still well in the 90s and quite humid as well. If you're doing anything like I'm doing, working or playing out in the heat, definitely understand these symptoms of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion, if you or someone you know or is around you is experiencing dizzy, heavy sweating, getting a little nauseated or feeling weak, it's time to move those people to the shade or even better indoors in the air conditioning. Heat stroke symptoms, confusion, dizziness, or passing out, that's a medical emergency. Call 911 and get your the people around you who are showing those symptoms the care that they need in that situation. So that's how we're looking for the next couple of days. Looking at the weather maps here, look at the European model. This is Friday evening we're looking at here. And I mentioned that we have a cold front moving our way. It doesn't get to us until Friday night, so that's the reason why Friday is going to be a sauna-type day here in North and South Carolina. But with all that heat and humidity in place ahead of that approaching front, you can see the model is showing some shower and thunderstorm activity popping up in the afternoon and taking one step ahead into the evening here. Those showers and thunderstorms continue to push through with the front. There is some risk for severe storms, mainly up in North Carolina. As a matter of fact, we go to level 2 out of 5 risk there for areas closer to the Virginia state line. And that's because we have some somewhat stronger winds aloft and also a situation where those downdrafts with the storms can be pretty strong. So there's going to be the potential for the storms to bring some of the stronger winds down to the surface and cause some damaging winds. And again, the greatest threat for that's going to be along and north of I-40 in North Carolina. Looks like the hail risk is low. It looks like the tornado risk is minimal. You can never say never for tornado risks, but it looks like it's about as close to zero as it can be for a severe weather situation for us here in the Carolinas. Now, Going back to the models here, let's take a look. There we go. If I can find the right tab. There we go. As we go into the weekend, we are going to stay on the hot side, but not quite as extreme. This front comes through, does have a slight cooling behind it. For your Saturday, there we go. There's Saturday evening. We have what's left of the front washing out over South Carolina and causing a few pop-up thunderstorms. The severe weather risk is very low for your Saturday. And then stepping forward into Sunday, once again, it looks like just a hot, humid day without much in the way of shower and thunderstorm activity. Some potentially isolated ones along the coastal plain, thanks to the sea breeze front there generating a shower thunderstorm, and maybe a few up in the mountains in upstate South Carolina as well. As for temperatures, South Carolina, your Saturday, once again, looks like Saturday looks pretty hot, 95 to 100 again across much of the state. And then Sunday, once again, a lot of the state in the 95 to 100 degree range. North Carolina, there's your Saturday. Not quite as miserable as South Carolina, but pretty hot nonetheless, with temperatures 95 plus over a good chunk of the state. We will see it a little bit cooler in the mountains with highs only in the 80s up there. And out at the Outer Banks, y'all can enjoy highs only in the mid 80s as well. Sunday, the temperatures look like they tick up a little bit. We could see maybe 100 degrees in Raleigh and Fayetteville once again. 95 for Charlotte, 98 in Rocky Mount, but once again 80s there up in the mountains and close to the coast, especially for the Outer Banks. Now, we'll take another couple steps forward to look into early next week. That's when it looks like we'll see some relief as a more robust cold front moves in. Monday still likely to be a hot day, but not quite as rough, with highs in the high 80s to mid 90s from mountains to coast. Well, actually, the mountains are probably in the low to middle 80s, but the foothills, we'll call it foothills to coast, 80s to mid 90s for the coastal plain away from the beaches. Then, again, Monday, you have a front moving in that will generate some showers and thunderstorms. And Tuesday, that becomes stationary, mostly across South Carolina, it looks like, but maybe eastern North Carolina looks like they could get in on the shower and thunderstorm activity, and that'd be a good thing because the last week's been dry. After a rainy spell, we've kind of dried out again, so it would be nice to get another good chance of rain here. Behind that, toward the middle of next week, it looks like we get a decent day on Wednesday with that front washing out and only causing stray thunderstorms along the coast. Later next week, going into Thursday and Friday, we heat up again for another front moves our way sometime next weekend. All right, y'all, that's your forecast. Let's go Canes. Let's go get that cup, boys. Y'all be good and enjoy tonight's show.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Carolina Weather Group. So glad you could be here with us. Again, Patreon and YouTube members got early access to our interview with the SPC. If you want to join and support the show, you too can get some benefits like checking out our new Carolina Weather Net. It's in testing right now, and it's available to those members and those Patreon supporters. And we're going to give you a sneak peek if you're watching right now with us on YouTube. If not, hopefully you'll come find us over there on YouTube. But for now, from Charlotte, I'm James Brierton. Thanks for joining us for the Carolina Weather Group. We'll see you again back here real soon.